The snow doesn't care if you live or die, it just keeps falling. Emily Carter couldn't feel her fingers anymore. She couldn't feel her feet. What she could feel was her 5-year-old daughter pressed against her chest, trembling so hard it felt like a seizure, and her 8-year-old son dragging himself through snow that reached his waist, crying without making a sound because he was too cold and too scared to make noise. Behind them, somewhere in the white nothing, a man was coming, not to find them, to finish them. And the only thing standing between her family and a bullet in the dark was a door she hadn't knocked on yet. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city or country in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. And don't touch that like button yet. Save it for the moment that breaks you. Because there's a moment coming. Stay with me. The storm hit Granite Ridge without warning. That wasn't unusual. The mountains had a way of doing that, sitting perfectly quiet for days, almost polite about it, and then unleashing something biblical without so much as a shift in wind direction to warn you. Locals knew better than to trust a clear sky up here after November. Tourists didn't. Emily Carter wasn't a tourist. But she wasn't a local either. She was a woman running for her life. And she'd made the rookie mistake of thinking she had more time than she did. The Subaru had died 11 miles back. Not slowly, not with warning lights or a sputtering engine giving her a chance to coast to the shoulder. It died the way things die when they've been pushed past their limit. Suddenly, completely, without apology. One moment the heater was blasting and the wipers were losing their battle against the snow. The next, silence. The dash went dark. The wheels locked. The car slid sideways across the empty mountain road and kissed a guardrail with a sound like a gunshot before stopping cold. Emily had sat there for exactly 4 seconds. Then Noah's voice came from the back seat. "Mom? Mom, why did we stop?" She'd looked in the rearview mirror. Her son's face was pale and confused, his dark hair pressed flat from where he'd been sleeping against the window. Beside him, Lily was still asleep, her mouth slightly open, her stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing ear that she'd named Captain, tucked under her chin. 4 seconds. She'd allowed herself 4 seconds of panic. Then she'd unbuckled and started moving. Well, that had been 2 hours ago. Now the road was gone. She couldn't see it anymore. The snow had erased it sometime in the last 40 minutes, filling in the tire tracks they'd been following, swallowing the painted yellow lines she'd been using as a guide. The trees pressed close on both sides, enormous dark shapes looming through the white. The wind wasn't gusting anymore. It was sustained, a constant 40-mile-per-hour wall of frozen air that stole the breath right out of your lungs if you turned into it wrong. Lily had stopped complaining about being cold 20 minutes ago. That terrified Emily more than anything else. A child who stops complaining about being cold isn't adjusting. She's shutting down. "Lily, baby, talk to me." Emily adjusted her grip on her daughter, shifting the girl higher on her hip. Lily's arms were locked around her neck, her face buried in Emily's collar. "Tell me about Captain. What's Captain doing right now?" A long pause, then muffled, "Sleeping." "He's sleeping? In this weather?" Emily forced a laugh. It came out wrong, too tight, too high. "Captain needs to wake up. Tell him to wake up." "Captain says he's tired." "Tell him I said so." Another pause. "He says okay?" Good enough. Noah was 4 feet ahead of her, plowing through a drift that came to his chest. He hadn't said a word in the last 15 minutes. He was 8 years old, and he understood, with the terrible clarity that children sometimes develop when adults stop pretending everything is fine, that silence was probably the right call right now. He just walked. Head down, arms pumping, jaw set in a way that made Emily's chest ache because it was the exact same expression his father made when... She killed that thought before it finished. Keep walking. Don't think about him. Just keep walking. She smelled the smoke first. It was faint, almost impossible to separate from the pine and the frozen air. But it was there. Wood smoke. The real kind, not chimney smoke from a gas fireplace. The kind that came from actual burning logs, old and resinous and real. Emily stopped. "Noah." Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat. "Noah, stop." He stopped and turned, and even in the dark she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. His eyebrows were dusted with snow. His lips had gone a color she didn't want to think about. "What? Do you smell that?" He tilted his head, sniffed. His eyes changed. "Is that fire?" She turned slowly, trying to locate the direction. The wind was playing tricks, swirling the scent around. Somewhere close. Come on. She didn't wait for him to answer. She turned right, off what she'd assumed was the road, pushing through a line of pine branches that dumped a cascade of snow down her neck. She barely felt it. Lily stirred against her chest. Mama? Almost there, baby. Almost there. She said it before she knew if it was true. 50 yards. 100. The trees thinned slightly, and then she saw it. A light. A single amber light in a window, barely visible through the curtain of falling snow, but there. Warm, real. A log cabin. Small, solid, built by someone who knew what they were doing. The kind of structure that doesn't apologize for what it is. A covered porch. A woodpile stacked high under an overhang, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Emily Carter, who hadn't cried once in 2 hours of walking through a blizzard with her children, felt her eyes burn. She walked faster. She knocked 3 times. Hard. With the flat of her hand because her fingers had stopped bending properly. Nothing happened. She knocked again. Louder, more desperate, the rhythm of it becoming something embarrassing that she couldn't control. Open the door. Please, please open the door. A dog barked. Once. Sharp and authoritative, not frantic. The bark of an animal that has decided something, not one that's surprised. Then silence. Then footsteps. Measured. Not rushing. The door opened. The man in the doorway was not what she expected. She'd expected an old mountain hermit. Some weathered survivalist type with a long beard and suspicious eyes, maybe holding a shotgun at waist level. She'd expected to have to explain herself quickly, to convince him she wasn't a threat, to perform helplessness in the way women sometimes had to perform it to be believed. Cole Mercer was none of those things. He was somewhere north of 40, with close-cropped dark hair gone silver at the temples, and a face that had been through something. Not just age, but events. There was a scar that ran from his left jawline up toward his ear that looked old and deliberate, the kind you get from a blade rather than an accident. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested function rather than vanity, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the cold air pouring in from outside. His eyes were gray. And they were moving, not in the distracted way of someone processing an unexpected visitor, but in the systematic cataloging way of someone who had been trained to assess a situation in the first 3 seconds and had never entirely stopped doing it. He took in Emily's face, the children, the direction she'd come from, her posture. All of this happened before he said a single word. The dog appeared at his left knee, a German shepherd, big and black and tan with a muzzle that had gone almost entirely white. The animal sat without being told. Its dark eyes tracked Lily with an expression that was almost gentle. Cole Mercer looked at Emily Carter for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "Get inside," he said. "Both of you. Not come in. Not please, by all means. Just get inside, flat and direct, like it was a field order rather than hospitality." Emily got inside. The cabin was warm. Intensely, almost painfully warm after the cold outside. The kind of warmth that turns your skin into needles as the blood comes rushing back. Lily made a small, involuntary sound against Emily's chest. Noah stumbled through the door and just stood there for a moment with his eyes closed, breathing. Cole closed the door behind them. Through 2 deadbolts Emily hadn't noticed from outside. She noticed him notice her noticing that. "Sit." He nodded toward a heavy wooden table near the fireplace. "I'll get something hot." The interior of the cabin was not what the exterior had suggested. It was clean, organized in the way that military spaces are organized. Everything with a purpose, nothing decorative, nothing out of place. A bookshelf with battered paperbacks and technical manuals. Topographic maps pinned to one wall with handwritten notations in pencil. A workbench with tools laid out in a row. No television, no photographs. A rifle case, locked, bolted to the wall near the back hallway. Emily sat. She pulled Lily onto her lap and started working the wet coat off her daughter's shoulders. Noah dropped into the chair next to her and immediately put his arms on the table and his head on his arms. "Noah," she touched his shoulder. "Don't sleep yet. Drink something first." "Okay." He didn't lift his head. Cole appeared from the small kitchen with 2 mugs and a wooden bowl. He set the mugs in front of the children. Hot chocolate, she realized from the smell, and the bowl in front of Emily. Soup. Something thick and real, not from a can. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His hands were flat on the table. The dog settled near the fireplace, facing the door. "How far did you walk?" Cole asked. "I don't know exactly. Our car died. I think—" She stopped herself, recalibrated. "Maybe 2 miles, 2.5? He didn't react to this. "From what direction?" "North. We came up Route 9. We were heading toward—" She stopped again. Cole watched her stop. "Toward where?" he asked. The fire popped. Lily had her hands around the mug and was drinking with her eyes half closed, the way children do when they're warm and falling back into themselves. Emily looked at this stranger across the table, this man with the careful eyes and the locked rifle case, and the dog that sat facing the door. She thought about the last 18 months, the files she'd copied, the investigators she'd called, the handler named Reyes who'd told her, in a coffee shop in Portland, that she was the bravest woman he'd ever met, and that everything was going to be fine. She thought about the look on Victor's face when he found out. "Toward anywhere that wasn't where we were," Emily said carefully. Cole nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they've gotten exactly the answer they expected and don't particularly enjoy being right. He looked at her left wrist. She'd forgotten about the bruise. It was 4 days old and had deepened into a spectacular purple-green arc that wrapped from her wrist halfway up her forearm. The sleeve of her jacket had ridden up when she reached for the soup, and now it was just there. Emily pulled her sleeve down. "My husband," she started. "You don't have to explain anything," Cole said. "He's not—" She stopped. Tried again. "He's going to find us." The fire crackled. Cole looked at her without blinking. "How?" "There's a tracker. In the car." She watched his face for judgment. There was none. "I didn't know it was there until about 3 weeks ago. And by then—" She pressed her lips together. "By then, it was complicated." "The car's dead? Ed?" "Yes. GPS trackers run on their own batteries," he said. "Separate from the vehicle." Emily felt the soup go cold in her stomach. Noah lifted his head from the table. He was looking at Cole with the expression of a child who has heard something that the adults in the room haven't yet decided to share with him. "What does that mean?" Noah asked. Neither adult answered him. Cole stood up. He walked to the window beside the front door and stood to the side of it. Not in front of it, she noticed. Not like a person looking out a window. Like a person who understood that windows make you a target. He looked out for a long moment. "How long has your car been sitting out there?" he asked. His voice was level, professionally level. "Since before dark." He turned from the window. "Your husband," he said. "What did he do?" "Do. Before." Emily looked at her children. Lily was almost asleep again. Noah was watching Cole with those wide, too understanding eyes. "Military," she said. "Then private contracting." Something shifted in Cole's expression. Not much, just enough. "What branch?" he asked. "Army Special Forces." "Then he went private about 6 years ago." She paused. "His company works for people who don't want their names on paperwork." Cole absorbed this. He looked at the rifle case on the wall, looked at the front door, looked back at Emily. "How many men does he usually travel with?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't used the word men. She hadn't implied plurality. She'd said he's going to find us, singular, the way a woman talks about a dangerous husband. Cole Mercer had heard something else entirely. "You know what he does," she said quietly. "I know what men like him do," Cole said. "Yeah." The silence between them was a different kind now, less frightened and more serious. The distinction mattered. "4," Emily said. "He usually moves with 4, sometimes 6. Cole nodded. "Once." He walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a topographic map, and spread it on the table. He studied it for approximately 10 seconds, then pointed to a location. "Your car's here?" Emily leaned over. "About here, I think. Maybe slightly north." Cole said nothing. He was doing math in his head. Distance, time, road conditions, the speed at which a tracker's signal would be picked up and relayed to someone who knew how to read it. His expression when he finished the math was not reassuring. He folded the map. "Get your kids away from the windows," he said. He moved toward the back hallway. And stay quiet. Wait, Emily started. He stopped. Didn't turn around. He won't just stop, she said. This isn't a domestic situation. He's going to come here to... She stopped herself from finishing the sentence because Noah was in the room. He's not going to stop. Cole turned then. He looked at her for a moment, at the children, at the bruise on her wrist that she'd tried to hide. I know, he said simply. He disappeared down the hallway. Emily Carter sat at the table in a stranger's cabin in the middle of a blizzard, listening to her daughter breathe slowly beside her and her son sit in terrible adult silence, and she understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has run out of options, that whatever happened next, she was not in control of it. The dog was still by the fireplace. Its ears had moved. Both pricked forward now, angled toward the door. Its low, sustained growl was the only warning. Then the lights went out. The darkness was not gradual. It was instant, the kind of total engineered blackout that doesn't happen by accident. 1 second the cabin had light, warm and amber and real. The next second there was nothing but the orange pulse of fireplace embers throwing weak shadows across the walls, and the sound of the blizzard outside. And Shadow's growl dropping lower and lower until it became something felt rather than heard. Emily's hand found Noah's arm in the dark. She squeezed. He didn't make a sound. Lily stirred on the chair beside her. Mama. Shh. Emily's hand moved to her daughter's mouth, gently but firm. Shh, baby. Inside voice, tiniest inside voice. Lily went still. Cole came back down the hallway in 12 seconds. Emily knew because she counted. He was moving differently now. Not the measured, unhurried walk from before. Faster, quieter, with a deliberateness that made no sound on the wooden floor. He had something in his hands. She couldn't see what. He appeared at the edge of the firelight, crouched slightly, and scanned the room the same way he'd scanned her at the door. Systematic, fast, cataloging. Power lines cut, he said, low. Almost not a voice at all. Not the storm. Line runs underground this far up. Storm can't touch it. Emily heard what he didn't say. Someone cut it. How long ago did you last see your car from the road? He asked. I didn't look back. Okay. He moved to the window again, same position as before, standing to the side, just enough angle to see out without being silhouetted. The tracker signal would have been broadcasting the whole time. If someone's been monitoring it. Victor has people, Emily said. He doesn't just drive up himself. He sends people first. Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind drove a fresh wall of snow against the glass with a sound like static. To do what? He asked. To confirm the location. Then he comes. Cole moved away from the window. He crouched in front of the children, which surprised Emily. She hadn't expected that. He looked at Noah first, levelly, without the condescending softness that adults sometimes put on for kids in difficult moments. You understand what's happening? Cole asked him. Noah held his gaze. Sort of. Good enough. Cole looked at Lily. She was watching him with the enormous, trusting eyes of a 5-year-old who has decided on instinct alone that this person is safe. What's your rabbit's name? Lily blinked. Captain? Captain. Cole nodded seriously. Captain needs to be really quiet for a while. Can he do that? Lily considered this with the gravity the question deserved. He's already quiet. Smart rabbit. Cole stood. He looked at Emily. In the firelight, his expression was difficult to read, but there was no panic in it. That was what struck her most. No panic at all. I need you to tell me everything, right now, fast, the version without the parts you're protecting them from. Emily looked at her kids. Noah, she said, take Lily to the couch. Keep the blanket around both of you. Mom, please. He heard the please. He took his sister's hand and moved to the couch without another word, pulling the heavy wool blanket off the back of it and wrapping it around them both. He didn't pretend to stop listening. She didn't pretend he would. Cole pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, forearms on the table. The thing in his hands she could see now was a small device, rectangular, matte black, with a single red LED blinking on its face. He set it on the table between them. Talk, he said. She talked. Not the version she'd given federal investigators, careful and organized and built for credibility. The real version. The one she'd been carrying alone for 18 months like a stone she couldn't put down. She'd met Victor Kane 9 years ago at a friend's wedding in Savannah. He'd been handsome in that particular military way. Not soft, but controlled, every movement economical and purposeful. He'd been recently separated from the army, or so he said. Honorable discharge after 12 years in Special Forces, 3 deployments, the kind of service record that gets summarized in a paragraph because the details are classified. She'd been 29 and working in cybersecurity consulting for a firm out of Atlanta. They'd made sense together, she thought. 2 people who understood discipline. She knew now that she'd confused discipline with something else. The first 2 years had been fine. The third had started showing cracks. Victor traveled constantly. Contracts he couldn't discuss. For clients he never named. The money was extraordinary. Enough to buy a house in the Virginia suburbs. Enough to buy the second car and the vacations and the life that looked, from the outside, exactly like the kind of life people aspire to. She'd stopped asking about the contract sometime around year 4. She'd told herself it was respect for his professional boundaries. She understood now that it was something closer to fear of the answer. Noah was born in year 3, Lily in year 5. Things changed after Lily. Not immediately, but slowly, the way water changes rock. Not violently, but inevitably. Victor's control, which had always been present but manageable, tightened. He had opinions about where she worked, about who she talked to, about the hours she kept. These opinions were expressed quietly, reasonably, in the measured voice of a man making suggestions. And yet somehow the suggestions always landed with the weight of directives. The first time he put his hands on her, they'd been arguing about her travel schedule. A client in Seattle, 3 nights, nothing unusual. He'd grabbed her wrist when she reached for her phone. Not to hurt her, or so she told herself afterward. Just to stop her from leaving the room. Just to stop her. She'd noticed that his grip left marks that lasted 4 days. She had not gone to Seattle. Cole listened to all of this without interrupting. His face didn't move into sympathy or horror or any of the expressions people performed when they heard things like this. He just listened, and his eyes stayed on hers, and that steadiness was somehow more useful than comfort would have been. "The files," he said when she paused. "Tell me about those." Emily exhaled. "About 2 years ago, Victor asked me to set up an encrypted file storage system for his company. Said it was for contract documentation, invoices, operational reports, that sort of thing." She pressed her fingers against the table. "I'm good at what I do. I built it exactly the way he asked, and then I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I was troubleshooting a sync issue. I had to go into the root directory." She paused. "The files weren't contract documentation." Cole waited. "Arms transaction records," she said. "Shipping manifests. Inventory logs. I didn't understand all of it at first. Some of it was in code, layered notation that looked like corporate formatting but wasn't. But I'm good with patterns. I've been good with patterns since I was a kid." She looked at the blinking LED on the device between them. "It took me 3 weeks to map enough of it to understand what I was looking at. Weapon systems, military grade, the kind that don't move across borders without serious paperwork that these records didn't have." "Who was the end customer?" "Multiple. That's what made it complicated. Not a single buyer. A distribution network. Someone was supplying weapons to 4 or 5 different groups simultaneously, and Victor's company was the logistics bridge." She met Cole's eyes. "I don't know who's at the top. I copied what I had, and I got out." "Out to who?" "A federal investigator named Reyes, David Reyes. He reached out to me through a secure channel. I'd apparently triggered some kind of financial surveillance wire in the process of mapping the files. He told me I wasn't the first person to notice something wrong with Victor's company. He said if I could provide documentation, and you gave him the documentation." "I gave him everything I had." Cole was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. Shadow, still near the door, shifted without standing, repositioning his weight. "When did Victor find out?" Cole asked. 6 weeks ago. Emily's voice dropped. "He didn't say anything at first. That was the worst part. I noticed things changing. Access codes on his home office door. His phone, which had never been locked, started requiring a scan, and he started watching me. Not obviously, but I knew." "Did he threaten you directly?" 3 weeks ago, yes." She pulled her sleeve up without looking down at her arm. Let him see the bruise clearly in the firelight. He said if I tried to take the children and run, he would find us wherever we went, and the finding wouldn't be the end of it. Cole looked at the bruise for exactly 1 second. But you ran anyway, he said. He left for what he said was a 2-day contract in Colorado. I think he was going to come back and she stopped. I wasn't going to wait and find out. I took the kids and I drove. Without telling Reyes? She hesitated. I tried. His number was disconnected. Something moved in Cole's expression. Something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. His jaw tightened slightly. Disconnected how? Dead tone or redirect? Dead tone. He looked down at the table, looked at the blinking device. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it behind his eyes. Okay, he said quietly. Okay? The word came out with more edge than she intended. What does okay mean? What is that? It means I understand the situation. He stood. It means you were right that running was the only option. He picked up the device from the table. And it means we have approximately, he looked at the LED, less time than I'd like. Emily stood. How do you know how much time? Because that's a motion detector, he said. Passive infrared. I have 6 of them mounted in the tree line at the edge of my property. 3 of them have already triggered. The room got very quiet. 3? She asked. In a spread pattern, not wildlife. Animals don't move in a coordinated line. He was already moving toward the back hallway. At least 3 people on the north perimeter, possibly more on the south that haven't hit the sensors yet. Emily looked at her children on the couch. Noah was watching her with that terrible stillness. Come on, Cole said from the hallway. Bring the kids. The hallway was short. 3 doors, 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom, one that Cole went to directly and unlocked with a key he kept on a simple ring clipped to his belt. The door opened inward. Emily expected a room. It was a room, technically, but what it contained made her breath catch. The walls were lined with military-grade storage panels, pegboard reinforced with steel backing, organized with the precision of a man who had once lived and died by the availability of his equipment. 2 rifles hung on the left wall, an AR-patterned carbine with an optic and a suppressor threaded to the barrel, and a shorter, heavier weapon she didn't recognize. Handguns in a mounted case, 2 of them, both holstered and ready. Body armor on a stand in the corner set. Plate carriers, loaded, 2 sizes. 1 adult, 1 smaller. As if he'd planned for this, or planned for something like it. Shelves along the back wall held medical supplies in labeled pouches, radio equipment, batteries in sealed bags, water in collapsible bladders. Everything organized, everything within arm's reach, everything oriented toward one purpose. This was not a hunting cabin. Emily stood in the doorway and felt something shift in her understanding of where she was. You planned for this, she said. Not an accusation, more like an observation she didn't know what to do with. Cole was already pulling on the plate carrier, adjusting the straps with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. I planned for something, he said. What does that mean? He looked at her briefly. It means I didn't come up here because the fishing was good. He lifted the AR carbine off the wall, ran a press check without looking at it, thumb and forefinger at the chamber, confirming the round without disturbing it. The motion was so casual and so fast that it almost didn't register. There's a root cellar. He nodded toward the bedroom. Floor panel under the rug on the left side of the bed. Heavy lift ring. It's dry, it's insulated, and it's vented. There are 2 LED lanterns down there and food for 3 days. He looked at Noah. You're going to have to help your mom with the panel. It's heavy. Noah nodded without hesitation. Okay. There's a radio down there, black handset, looks like a walkie-talkie. 1 button on the side. Hold it for 5 seconds and it sends an emergency beacon. Don't use it unless I tell you to or unless... He stopped. Unless what? Emily asked. Unless you need to, he said. He handed her one of the handguns, a compact 9mm, already in a holster. She took it. The weight was familiar. Her father had been a firearms instructor, one of the few pieces of her past that had turned out to be useful. Cole registered this. The way she took it, the way her hand naturally indexed away from the trigger guard. He didn't say anything, but his eyes adjusted slightly. 12+1 in the chamber, he said. If you have to use it inside that cellar, it means everything else has already gone wrong. And if everything else goes wrong? She asked. He pulled a second magazine from the wall panel and slid it into a pouch on the plate carrier. Then you use it. He went to the bedroom, pulled back the rug. The floor panel was exactly where he'd said, heavy wood, iron lift ring. He pulled it up one-handed and set it against the wall, revealing a square of darkness below and the top of a wooden ladder. Go, he said. Emily looked at him. This stranger in body armor with a combat rifle and a German shepherd sitting at his heel. This man with a scar on his jaw and a hidden armory and a root cellar he'd stocked for a situation that hadn't existed until 2 hours ago. Who are you? She asked. Not what's your name. She knew his name. She'd seen it on the envelope addressed on the kitchen counter. Cole Mercer, handwritten, return address in Virginia. She meant the other question, the real one. Cole looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not quite emotion, more like the shadow of it, the place where emotion had been at some point and left a mark. Nobody anymore, he said. Get in the cellar. She got in the cellar. The root cellar smelled like earth and pine resin and something faintly metallic. The LED lanterns cast a pale blue light across packed dirt walls braced with timber. It was roughly 8 feet by 10, low-ceilinged, warmer than she expected. There were cans of food stacked along one wall, 2 folded wool blankets, the radio Cole had described. She lifted Lily down first, then Noah climbed down himself. She came last, pulling the floor panel down into place above her head, as Cole had shown her. There was a latch on the inside, a steel bar that slid into a bracket. She set it. The panel closed. The three of them sat in the pale lantern light and listened. Above them, muffled by wood and earth and snow-packed silence, they heard Cole's footsteps move across the bedroom floor, then down the hallway. Then nothing. Mom, Noah said. She looked at him. Is he going to be okay? He asked. Emily looked at the ceiling, at the pattern of the floor joists above her, at the latch on the panel that was not, in any real sense, a protection against what was coming. Yes, she said. She said it the way she'd learned to say things in the last 18 months, firmly, without hesitation, because hesitation was a thing children heard in your voice and carried in their bodies long after the moment had passed. She believed it approximately 40%. Cole stood at the front window of the cabin and watched the tree line. Shadow was beside him. Not sitting now. Standing, weight shifted slightly forward, his focus absolute and trained on the darkness between the pines. The dog's breathing had changed, slower, deeper, the particular respiratory pattern of an animal that has shifted into a different mode. Cole had seen it before, on bases and places that no longer existed under the names he'd known them by, in the dark outside of outposts that were supposed to be secure. Shadow didn't make that change unless something real was coming. Cole moved back through the cabin. He checked the side window. Nothing on the west approach yet. Checked the rear window through the bedroom. Nothing visible, but the motion detector app on his phone showed 2 more triggers on the south sensor. 5 contacts now, minimum. Possibly 6. He'd planned for 6. He hadn't planned for Victor Kane specifically, but he'd planned for men like him. The math of men like that was consistent regardless of who was running the operation. They would want to eliminate communication first, then mobility, then resistance. Power was already gone. His vehicle, a 4-wheel drive pickup parked under a lean-to on the east side, was probably being assessed right now, its utility or its threat being calculated by someone in the tree line with a night optic. He went back to the armory, pulled a second radio handset, different from the emergency beacon. This one a tactical comms unit, encrypted frequency. He switched it on. Scanned. Static. Static. Then a fragment. Confirm visual on structure. 1 vehicle. No movement on primary. A voice. Male. Clipped. Professional. The cadence of someone who had done this before and wasn't nervous about it. Cole listened. Alpha, what's your status on the north? 2 minutes out from breach point. Waiting on your call. Stand by. Cole set the radio down and picked up the carbine. He did a final check. Optic settings, suppressor hand tight, magazine seated, charging handle cycled. He put the handset in his left ear, volume low. He wanted to hear the outside, not the radio. He turned off the remaining lantern in the front room. The cabin went to firelight only. He stood in the dark and breathed. There was something he hadn't told Emily Carter. something he hadn't told anyone in 4 years, which was how long he'd been on this mountain. The reason he'd come here wasn't entirely the one he gave when he thought about it in daylight. That he'd needed quiet, needed distance, needed to stop being what he'd been. Those things were true, but they weren't complete. The other reason was simpler. He'd known, with the certainty of a man who had spent 15 years in places where violence was the operating language, that the world he'd come from would eventually follow him. Not necessarily the same men, not necessarily the same operation, but the same grammar, the same logic, the same knock on the door at the worst possible hour. He'd stocked the cellar for 2 adults, not for children. That was the only thing he hadn't accounted for. He thought about the way Noah had looked at him when he'd asked if the boy understood what was happening. Sort of. And then the level gaze, steady and not asking to be lied to. He thought about Lily asking Captain to be quiet. Cole Mercer exhaled slowly through his nose. Then the front window exploded inward. The concussive blast hit him sideways. Not a bullet, a flashbang, military grade, thrown through the glass at an angle calculated to disorient the room's occupant. The white detonation lit the entire cabin for a fraction of a second. Cole had already moved, not because he was superhuman, but because he'd seen the arm in his peripheral vision a half-second before the throw, and a half-second was enough if you'd spent enough years living inside those margins. He was behind the heavy wooden kitchen table when the bang went off. Hands over his ears, mouth open, eyes closed. Old training, old reflex. The kind of thing you did without deciding to. The ringing was immediate and total. He rode it, kept moving, came up on the far side of the table with the carbine raised. The front door exploded inward on its hinges. The first man through moved fast and low, weapon up, sweeping right, the trained way, covering the angles. He was wearing a balaclava and tactical gear, a suppressed rifle in his hands, moving with the fluid competence of someone who had done room clearances before. Cole shot him twice. Center mass. The suppressor turned the reports into flat mechanical coughs, barely audible over the wind howling through the broken window. The man dropped. Behind him, from somewhere in the white dark outside, somebody screamed something into a radio, and then Cole heard a voice he hadn't heard in 6 years. Calm, controlled, with the particular quality of a man who had never once in his adult life believed that a situation was beyond his ability to manage. "Mercer," the voice said from the darkness outside the door. "I know you're in there." Cole stayed behind the table. He said nothing. "Small world," Victor Kane said. "Smaller than you'd think." Cole didn't answer. That was the first thing. The silence. Because men like Victor Kane fed on response, on the evidence that their voice had landed, that the other person was calculating, adjusting, afraid. Silence denied him that. Silence was its own kind of message, and Cole had been sending it for 15 years before he'd ever come to this mountain. He moved while Victor was still talking. Low, fast, away from the table and toward the interior wall. Not the exterior walls, never the exterior walls when you don't know where the shooters are positioned, because a rifle round at this range would pass through log siding like it was cardboard if the shooter knew the angle. Cole knew the angle. He'd walked this property in every season for 4 years. He knew where a competent team would set up, where the sight lines opened between the trees, which windows offered the best field of fire into the main room. He knew because he'd planned it himself. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. The habit of a man who had spent too many years being the person outside the building to ever stop thinking like one. He pressed his back against the interior wall beside the hallway entrance. From here, he had a sight line to the front door and partial cover from 3 of the 4 exterior walls. It wasn't a good position. It was the least bad one. Outside, Victor's voice again. "I've got 6 men, Mercer. You've got 1 door. Let's not make this complicated." Cole counted the problems. 1 man down in the entrance. That left 5, minimum. 3 that had triggered the north sensors, 2 on the south. Victor himself was somewhere close, but not inside, which meant he was directing rather than breaching. Smart. A commander who puts himself at the back of an assault survives longer than one who leads it. Cole had known men on both sides of that calculation. The wind screamed through the broken front window. Snow was already drifting in across the floor, building against the base of the bookshelf, coating the spines of the technical manuals in white. Cole heard boots on the porch. 2 sets. moving to the sides of the door rather than through it. They'd learned from the first man, or they'd been told to flank. Someone out there was reading the situation and adjusting. That was the thing about working with professional teams. They adapted. They didn't panic, and they didn't freeze. They just recalibrated and tried again, and they kept trying until the math resolved in their favor. Cole needed to change the math. He reached into the left chest pocket of the plate carrier and pulled out a cylindrical metal object roughly the size of a D battery. A distraction device, not military issue, something he'd put together himself from components that were individually legal and collectively very much not. He didn't use it yet. He held it and waited. The two sets of boots stopped moving. Silence. Then, from the side window to his right, an arm reached through where the glass had been. Someone had cleared the remaining shards without a sound, which meant they'd been outside for a while and had the time to do it carefully. And a hand appeared holding a small mirror on a telescoping rod. A checking mirror. Old technique, simple, effective. They were trying to map the room. Cole let them look. He was pressed against the interior wall, outside the angle of any mirror positioned at that window. He knew this because he'd worked out the geometry during his second winter here, on a particularly quiet night when he'd had nothing else to do but think through the ways a building could be taken. The mirror withdrew. Then the voice again. Not Victor this time, someone closer. A whisper intended for another person that carried further than intended in the frozen quiet. Clear on east, moving on your count. A count. They were going to rush both entry points simultaneously. Standard procedure. Create too many problems at once for a single defender to manage. Force a choice. Cover the door or cover the window. And exploit whichever one he abandoned. Standard procedure for a standard defender. Cole moved. He went down the hallway on his hands and knees, fast and silent, into the bedroom. He didn't go to the window. He went to the closet, which was built into the exterior wall. He opened it from the side, pushed the hanging clothes to the right, and put his hand on the panel at the back. A false wall. 6 inches of dead space behind it. He'd built it himself the first summer, working alone, taking 3 weeks because he only had one pair of hands and the framing had given him trouble. He'd complained about it to Shadow, who had offered no useful input. He opened the panel and slid through. The dead space ran the width of the back bedroom wall, roughly 14 feet. At the far end, a small hatch opened outward. Not a door, just a panel, painted to match the exterior log siding, hinged at the bottom. Cole had designed it to be indistinguishable from the wall casing at a distance. Up close, in daylight, someone who knew what to look for might find it. At night, in a blizzard, with their attention on the front and side entries of the building, nobody was looking at the back wall. He pressed his ear to the hatch. Wind, snow, distant, barely audible, the creak of someone's boots on the frozen ground on the east side of the building. Maybe 20 feet away. Cole breathed. He thought about the children in the cellar, about Lily asking Captain to be quiet, about Noah's jaw set in that particular way. He opened the hatch. The cold hit him like a wall. No easing into it, no buffer, just the full, uncut force of the storm slamming against his face and hands and any exposed skin it could find. He was through the hatch and down into the snow in 2 seconds, the hatch lowering back into place behind him under its own spring tension. He was on the east side of the building, in the shadow of the overhang, in approximately 18 inches of accumulated snow. The wind was coming from the northwest, which put it mostly at his back. The tree line was 40 feet to his right. He didn't stand up. He moved laterally, staying low, using the foundation of the cabin as cover. The snow made movement slow and loud. There was no getting around that. He worked with it instead of against it, using the gusts to mask the sounds he couldn't avoid making. He found the first man 7 feet from the east window. The mercenary was positioned with his back to the cabin wall, facing the tree line, watching for a threat from outside rather than from the building itself. A fair assumption. A wrong one. He was wearing a white overshell over his tactical gear, good camouflage, which meant someone had thought this through, and he had a suppressed rifle at his shoulder, scanning the perimeter. Cole came up from his left side. He didn't use the carbine. A shot, even suppressed, would bring the others. He came in low and fast, left hand seizing the man's rifle and pinning it down while his right arm went across the throat from behind. Not a choke, a blood choke, different mechanism, different timeline. The man struggled, well-trained and strong, driving his elbow back hard enough to catch Cole in the ribcage with real force. Cole felt it, didn't let go. The elbow connected twice more before the man's legs went unreliable and he folded. Cole lowered him into the snow, took his radio, took his secondary, a compact pistol in a hip holster. He was at the northeast corner of the building now. He looked around the edge. Two men on the north side, positioned at angles to cover the front door and the north window simultaneously. Beyond them, at the edge of the tree line, a third figure standing back and slightly elevated. Someone on an improvised platform, probably a fallen log, with what looked like a longer rifle. A designated marksman. Probably had a thermal optic, which meant Cole was visible as a heat signature against the snow, regardless of how well he blended visually. He pulled back around the corner. The radio in his hand crackled. A voice? Careful, checking. East, confirm status. Cole pressed the transmit button once. Let it open for a half-second of ambient wind noise. Released. A pause. East, say again? Another press. Wind noise, static. It wouldn't hold for long. They'd know within 30 seconds. Cole moved back along the east wall, around to the south, came around the corner and stopped. A man was standing 6 feet away, facing the back of the cabin, rifle raised. They saw each other at the same moment. The mercenary was faster on the trigger, but Cole was already moving sideways, and the shot, suppressed but still sharp enough to hear, punched through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier and went into the log siding. Cole closed the distance in 2 steps, both hands on the rifle barrel, pushing it up and away, driving his body into the man's chest and taking them both into the cabin wall. The impact was brutal. Cole felt his shoulder compress wrong against the logs, but the rifle came free. He hit the man once with the rifle's stock. Then again. The man slid down the wall and sat in the snow. Cole stood over him for a moment, breathing harder than he'd like. His shoulder ached. His ribs, where the elbow had connected, were sending signals he was choosing not to process yet. He moved. Around to the north side. The radio was active now. Voices, several of them. The calm professional cadence breaking down slightly at the edges. The specific tone of men who have realized their count is wrong. East is down. North 2. Move to cover. Where is he? Where's the contact? Quiet. Victor's voice, cold as the storm. Mercer is outside, thermal on the tree line now. Cole heard the designated marksman begin to move on the platform in the trees, repositioning, trying to get a sightline around the cabin. Cole had maybe 15 seconds before the thermal optic found him. The 2 men on the north side were moving. One was angling toward the front of the cabin, the other was rotating to cover the east, both of them with their attention on the tree line, because Victor had said Mercer is outside, and the natural assumption was that outside meant the woods. Cole stepped around the northeast corner and walked toward the front of the building. The man near the front door heard him and turned. And Cole hit him with everything. Not technique, not precision. Weight and velocity, and the accumulated force of a man who has decided that this particular moment is not the place for subtlety. The man went down hard into the porch boards, landing on his rifle in a way that made a sound that had nothing to do with wood. Cole grabbed the man's radio, dropped it, stomped it. Then the marksman found him. The first round came from the tree line with a sound like a thunderclap, no suppressor on this one, and it hit the porch post 6 inches from Cole's left ear and sent a spray of splintered wood across his face. Cole went flat, behind the collapsed man, using the body as what it was. Not clean, not comfortable. The calculation of someone who has stopped having preferences. The second round hit the porch post higher up. The third didn't come. Shadow. Cole heard it before he understood it. A sound from the tree line, not a shot, something different. A shout, cut short. The sharp percussive sound of an impact. Then quiet from the tree line. Cole raised his head. He looked at the porch, at the broken front door, at the amber light of the fireplace coming through the doorway, warm and absurdly peaceful against the chaos of the last 4 minutes. He stood up. His face was bleeding from the wood fragments. He could feel it, warm against the cold, a thin line from his cheekbone to his jaw. He didn't touch it. He walked to the front door and stood at the side of it, back to the wall. Inside, a voice. Victor Kane's voice, closed now. Inside the cabin. moving through rooms with the particular unhurried confidence of a man who believes the situation is resolved. Emily. Quiet, almost gentle. The voice he probably used when he wanted her to think things were going to be manageable. I know you're here. The kids too, I'd imagine. Come on out and we can do this the right way. A pause. Footsteps moving down the hallway. There's no one else coming for you, Em. You understand that? Your investigator, Reyes, whatever he told you, that's over. The channel's been closed for 2 months. Another pause. Searching rooms. You're smart. You've always been smart, but there's a difference between smart and... Cole stepped through the front door. Victor was at the end of the hallway, facing the bedroom. He heard the footstep and turned. 6 years. Cole had not seen this man in 6 years, not since a forward operating base in a country whose name he'd trained himself not to think about, not since a briefing room and a decision in the beginning of the sequence that had eventually brought Cole to this mountain and this cabin and this life he'd constructed out of what was left. Victor Kane looked the same, older, but the same. The kind of man who kept himself in the same physical condition regardless of decade, because for him it wasn't vanity, it was professional maintenance. Dark hair cropped close, jaw angular, eyes dark, and with that particular flatness that very controlled people sometimes developed, where the expression of the face and the operation of the mind behind it had been so long separated that the gap became permanent. He had a pistol in his right hand, pointed at the floor. They looked at each other across the length of the hallway. Mercer, Victor said. Kane. A pause. The fire crackled in the main room. The wind drove snow through the broken front window and it spiraled in the firelight like something from a different world. You took out my whole team, Victor said. It wasn't quite a question. Shadow got the last one. Victor's jaw moved slightly. Processing. He looked at Cole's face, the bleeding cut, the plate carrier, the carbine held low at his side. He looked at the hallway behind Cole. Where is she? Victor asked. Somewhere you're not going. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Cole knew that look. He'd seen it in negotiations and in briefing rooms and in exactly 2 firefights, and what it meant was that the man wearing it had finished calculating and arrived at a conclusion and was about to act on it. You don't know what she took, Victor said. You don't know what's connected to those files. You think this is a domestic situation, man looking for his wife. It's not. I know what it is. Then you know that the people she exposed don't send teams. They send the first team, and then they wait to see if they need to send another one. Victor's voice was level, reasonable. The voice of a man presenting facts rather than making threats. You stop me here. You're not stopping anything. You're just changing the timeline. Cole said nothing. She doesn't have protection anymore, Victor continued. Reyes is gone. Whatever federal case she thought she was building, gone. She has those files and nothing else, and the files by themselves don't move without someone on the inside pushing them. Without that, she's just a woman in the mountains who took something she shouldn't have taken. He tilted his head slightly. You understand what I'm telling you? I understand you, Cole said. Yeah. Then let me walk back there and talk to her. No one else has to get hurt. Cole looked at him. He thought about the briefing room 6 years ago, about the decision that had been made in that room by men who had the authority to make it, and the way Cole had sat in the chair across from those men and understood, in the specific and nauseating way of someone who had spent 15 years trusting a system, that the system had already decided something different from what he'd been told it would decide. He thought about why he'd left. Not just the mountain, all of it. You're going to walk out the front door, Cole said. That's the only direction you're going. Victor's expression didn't change. Not exactly, but something in it settled, the way things settle when a final decision is made and the deliberation is over. You were always too moral for this work, Victor said. You know that? Even back then, too much moral weight for the job. Probably, Cole said. Victor raised the pistol. Cole was already moving, not back, forward. Into the hallway, inside the angle of the weapon, left hand coming up and deflecting the pistol outward as the shot went off. Too loud, no suppressor, the report in the enclosed hallway like a physical blow to both ears. And then they were close, too close for the pistol to matter, and Cole drove his shoulder into Victor's chest and took them both into the bedroom doorframe. The impact cracked something in Cole's already damaged shoulder. He felt it clearly, a white-hot specific pain that his brain filed and set aside. Victor was strong. Not stronger than Cole, but close, and he was fresh where Cole was not, and he knew what he was doing. His knee came up hard and caught Cole in the thigh, not the intended target, but effective enough. His elbow drove back and found Cole's ear and made the world go sideways for a half second. They crashed into the bedroom, into the dresser, into the wall. Victor got a hand free and hit Cole across the jaw with something. The pistol butt, the edge of it, enough to open the cut on his face wider and make his vision strobe. Cole answered with his knee to Victor's midsection, once, twice, feeling the man's grip loosen slightly on the second. He didn't wait for a third opportunity. His right hand found Victor's wrist, the one with the pistol, and he rotated it, one specific motion, the mechanics of it so deeply ingrained that his body did it without consulting his brain. The wrist joint has limits. Cole found the limit and kept going. The pistol hit the floor. Victor made a sound that was not quite a word and drove Cole backward, using his body weight, both hands free now and reaching for Cole's throat. Cole let himself go backward, used it, rolled with it, came down with Victor's momentum, carrying them both onto the floor, and then the geometry changed and Cole was on top, knee across Victor's chest, one hand pressing down on the dislocated wrist. Victor stopped moving. Not because he'd given up, because the combination of the wrist and the knee and the weight had reduced his options to a number he couldn't work with. He breathed, fast and hard through his nose. Cole breathed, slower, trying to be slower. "Done?" Cole asked. Victor looked up at him. In the pale light from the cellar hatch, still closed, still latched, Emily had kept it closed. His face was unreadable, or almost. There was something in his eyes that Cole hadn't expected to see there. Not fear, not defeat, calculation. Still calculating, even now. "There's another team," Victor said, "already in transit." "You said that already." "I meant it." Cole looked at him. "Where?" 2 hours out. Maybe less, depending on the roads. Victor's voice was steady despite the wrist, despite the knee on his chest. "You can't hold this position that long, not with children, not in this storm." "I'm not planning to hold the position," Cole said. Something shifted in Victor's expression, the first real uncertainty. "Then what are you planning?" Cole didn't answer. He reached into the plate carrier with his free hand and pulled out a zip tie, one of several he'd put there before leaving the armory, not because he'd planned this specific sequence of events, but because you always carried restraints when you didn't know what you'd need them for. He secured Victor's wrist behind his back. He did it one-handed, which was awkward and slower than he'd like, and Victor tried twice during the process to use the opportunity to move. Cole leaned on the wrist the second time. Victor stopped trying. Cole stood. He picked up the pistol from the floor and cleared it, dropping the magazine and locking the slide back. He set both pieces on the dresser. He was breathing harder than he should be. His shoulder was a problem. His ear was ringing from the close-quarters shot, a high, thin whine that he knew from experience would either fade in an hour or stay for a week with no reliable way to predict which. His ribs reported in. He went to the rug on the left side of the bed, knelt down, knocked 3 times, pause, 2 times. The pattern he'd established without explaining it just told Emily. 3, then 2, that's me. A silence. Then the latch inside scraped back. The panel lifted from below, and Noah's face appeared first, pale, wide-eyed, with Emily's hand visible on his shoulder from below. The boy looked at Cole, at the blood on his face, at the state of the room, at Victor, zip-tied on the floor against the far wall, watching the ceiling. Noah looked back at Cole. "Is it over?" he asked. Cole looked at the room, at the man on the floor, at the broken door frame, at the snow coming in through the hallway from the broken window in the front room, building silently on the hardwood floor. "For now," he said. It wasn't everything Noah needed to hear. Cole knew that. But it was what was true, and a kid who had been through this night deserved the actual truth over a comfortable version of it. He reached down and offered Noah his hand. Noah took it and climbed out of the dark. Emily came up out of the cellar last. She'd handed Lily up to Noah first, then climbed the ladder herself. And when her head cleared the floor level and she saw the state of the bedroom, the broken door frame, the dresser shoved sideways, the dark smear on the wall that she made herself not identify, she stopped moving for a moment. Identify. She stopped moving for a moment. just stood on the ladder with her chin at floor level and took it in. Then she saw Victor. He was sitting against the far wall with his wrists bound behind him, his back straight, his face composed in that particular way she knew, the controlled stillness he put on when he was angry and didn't want anyone to see it. There was a cut above his eye that was bleeding slowly, and he hadn't tried to do anything about it. He was looking at the ceiling. He looked at her when she climbed out of the cellar. She looked back. 9 years of marriage, and she had never once in all of it seen him restrained, seen him physically contained. The image was so wrong, so inverted from every dynamic she'd learned to navigate, that for a second her brain refused to process it cleanly. Then Lily climbed out from behind her and pressed her face into Emily's leg, and Emily put her hand on her daughter's head and looked away from Victor. Cole was standing near the door. He had his back partially turned, giving her the moment without making a production of giving it to her. His hands were working on something, a radio, she realized, the tactical handset from the armory. "Second team," she said, not a question. "Victor says 2 hours." Cole didn't look up from the radio. "I'd planned for 90 minutes. You believe him?" A pause. "About that part?" "Yeah." She looked at her children. Noah had Lily by the hand, standing near the dresser, both of them watching Cole with the focused attention of people who have decided that watching this particular person is the most useful thing they can currently do. "What do we do?" Emily asked. Cole clicked something on the radio. Static, then a carrier tone. He adjusted the frequency dial. Small, deliberate turns. "We make a call." "To who?" He didn't answer immediately. He had the handset at his ear now, and he was listening to something she couldn't hear. His expression was unreadable. Then quietly, into the radio. "This is a Tier 1 emergency contact. Authentication code Romeo 7 Foxtrot November 04, requesting callback on this frequency." He released the transmit button. Waited. "If you're monitoring, the situation is active. The material is secured, and I have a primary contact in custody." He lowered the radio. Emily stared at him. "Authentication code," she said. Cole set the radio on the dresser. "Who are you?" she asked. The second time she'd asked that question tonight. This time it carried more weight. He turned around. He looked at her steadily, the way he'd looked at her across the kitchen table when she was telling him about the files. That particular quality of attention that was neither comfortable nor hostile, just present. "Someone who used to work for the same people Reyes worked for," he said. "Different division, different mandate." "Used to?" "Yeah, used to." Victor made a sound from the floor. Not a laugh. Something that wanted to be one. "This is poetic," he said. "You know that? Of all the cabins." "Quiet," Cole said. "She walked into a cabin belonging to the man who—" "Kane." Cole's voice didn't rise. It got quieter. "Quiet." Victor went quiet. Victor, not because he was intimidated, Emily thought, because he was, in some way she didn't fully understand yet, still calculating. And silence served that calculation right now. Cole looked back at her. "I'll explain what I can. Not everything, because some of it isn't mine to explain, and some of it is still classified in ways that actually matter. But what's relevant to your situation? Yes." Emily crossed her arms. It wasn't defiance, she was cold, and the arm crossing was physical before it was emotional. "Start now." He pulled out the chair from the small desk in the corner of the bedroom and sat down. He looked tired, she realized. Not exhausted. His eyes were still sharp, still moving, but the kind of tired that came from spending a significant amount of physical and mental resource in a short time, and then the adrenaline beginning to drain. "I ran intelligence support operations for a federal task force that was tracking the network Victor's company was plugged into," he said, "for about 3 years, before I came here. My job was to identify the logistics chain, the bridge between the suppliers and the end buyers. Not to prosecute, not to arrest, to map. And I got too close to something the people above me weren't ready to move on yet." He paused. "Or didn't want to move on. I'm still not entirely clear on which." Emily looked at him. "What happened?" "The operation got walked back. The case file got sealed. I got offered a very generous early retirement package, and I took it, and I came here." He said it flatly. No bitterness in it, or none that was audible. Just fact. Reyes was part of the same task force. Different role. He ran field contacts, sources, people on the inside of targets. When he reached out to you, he was operating outside official sanction, running a private line back into a case that had been officially closed. Emily felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. He didn't tell me that. He wouldn't have. It would have undermined your confidence in the information getting somewhere real. Was he wrong? Cole was quiet for a moment. The files you gave him were real, he said. The network is real. Whether the right people have received them and are doing something with them. He stopped. That's what I'm trying to find out right now. The radio on the dresser crackled. Cole was across the room in 2 steps. He had the handset up and at his ear before the second crackle finished. Copy, he said. Then he listened. Emily watched his face. His expression changed twice, once when he heard something that caused a slight tightening around his eyes, and once when he heard something else that caused the opposite, a fractional release of tension that she almost missed. Confirmed, he said into the radio. 4 in custody, 1 requiring medical. I need extraction for 3 civilians. Priority 1. Children. He glanced at the window. Storm conditions. You'll need rotary. Ridge is passable from the south approach if your pilot knows the terrain. He listened again. Copy that. I'll mark the LZ. He lowered the radio. LZ, Emily said. That's a landing zone. Yes. You're getting us out by helicopter. Trying to. Weather's going to be the deciding factor, not me. He looked at the window. The storm was still there, still relentless, but something in the quality of the darkness outside had shifted slightly. Or maybe she was imagining it, wanting to imagine it. They'll make the call based on the pilot's assessment. Who's they? Cole looked at her. Then he looked at the radio, then back at her. The look of a man deciding how much of something to hand over. People who've been watching this situation longer than you know, he said. When Reyes went dark 6 weeks ago, it wasn't because Victor shut him down. Reyes went quiet because he was told to. The task force that had been closed got quietly reopened 3 months ago. Different authorization level, different resources. He set the radio down. Your files didn't disappear. They were received, logged, and used to rebuild a case that someone had deliberately dismantled 2 years ago. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed. Not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision for her. So Reyes is alive, reassigned. He couldn't contact you because the operation required isolation of the source. You. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. He should have found a way to tell you that. He didn't. That's a conversation for another time and not mine to have. I ran because I thought, but I know what you thought. She put her hands flat on her thighs, breathed. Noah was watching her from the doorway, Lily half asleep on his shoulder, the stuffed rabbit hanging from his hand by one of its remaining ears. Is it actually over? Emily asked. The network. Victor's people. Is it? Tonight is one piece of it. Cole stood. He moved to the window again. The files you provided gave investigators enough to identify the top of the chain. Warrants are either already in place or in process. Victor's arrest tonight, along with the men outside, adds to that. He paused at the window. The second team he mentioned, that's real. And if they arrive before extraction, can you hold them off? He turned from the window and looked at her in a way that was honest without being reassuring. I'd rather not have to find out. Victor from the floor said, the second team isn't coming to finish the job. Both Cole and Emily looked at him. He'd adjusted his position against the wall slightly, sat up straighter. His face had changed. The composure was still there, but something underneath it had shifted in the last few minutes, some interior rearrangement she didn't understand. What does that mean? Cole asked. It means I made 2 calls after I found out Emily had talked to Reyes. Victor looked at his wife. The first call was to my operational director. The second was to the task force monitoring line. The one I knew about because I'd spent 18 months figuring out who was watching us and how. His jaw moved. The second team isn't coming to kill anyone. They're coming to clean up the men I brought tonight. My own people. The room was very quiet. Cole stared at him. You made a call to the task force, Cole said carefully. 3 weeks ago. Victor met his gaze. About a week after I put my hand on Emily's wrist. He said the last part without expression, but something moved behind his eyes. I've been running a double channel for 8 months. My director thinks I'm running this operation. The task force thinks I'm their inside contact. Emily stood up. That's not... She stopped, started again. That's not possible. You threatened me. You told me if I ran. I needed you to run, Victor said. I needed you out of that house and away from my operational circle before my director figured out what I was doing. If he'd had access to you, he would have used you. Leverage. To keep me in line, his voice was steady. I needed you scared enough to move. You broke my wrist. Your wrist isn't broken. Victor, your wrist isn't broken, he said again, and his voice did something then, a small crack in the controlled surface, barely audible, the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't listening for it. I know the difference. You know I know the difference. Emily stared at her husband. At this man she had feared for 18 months. At this man she had run from through a blizzard in the dark with their children. She didn't know what she felt. It wasn't relief exactly. It wasn't forgiveness. Not anywhere close to that. It was something more complicated and less comfortable than either of those things. The feeling of a floor you thought was solid turning out to be built on something you didn't get to examine closely enough. Cole was watching Victor with an expression that was professionally skeptical and processing at the same time. The men you brought tonight, Cole said. You sent them in knowing you were here? No. Victor's eyes moved to Cole. I knew Emily had found shelter somewhere on the ridge. I didn't know it was you until I came through that door. That was genuinely unexpected. The man I put down in the entrance. My director's man, not mine. Victor's voice went flat. The two on the south perimeter, mine. They knew to pull contact. They weren't going to breach. Cole thought about the south perimeter contacts. The ones who had triggered the sensors but never moved to breach. He thought about how he'd expected an assault from the south, and it hadn't come. Shadow took out the marksman, Cole said. The marksman was my director's. He wasn't supposed to be there. I found out about him 2 hours before we left. A pause. Is the dog? Shadow's fine. Victor nodded. Something in his shoulders lowered marginally. He'd had a dog once, Emily remembered, before Noah was born. A shepherd mix that had died old and slow, and Victor had dug the grave himself in the backyard and not spoken for the rest of that day. She had forgotten that. She hadn't forgotten enough, apparently. Cole moved to the hallway door. He looked back at Victor. The contact information for your task force handler. I need it. Left inside chest pocket. There's a phone, encrypted. The contact is listed under a name that looks like a restaurant. Cole crossed the room, reached into Victor's jacket, found the phone, held it up. Unlock it. 77441. Cole entered the code, looked at the screen, looked at Victor. Then he looked at Emily. I need to make another call, he said. Stay with them. He walked out of the bedroom. Emily stood in the room with her bound husband and her half-sleeping children, and the evidence of a fight across every surface, and she didn't sit down again. She stood because sitting felt like a decision she wasn't ready to make. Emily. Victor's voice was quiet. She didn't look at him. I know that doesn't fix anything, he said. No. I'm not... A pause. I'm not asking for anything right now. I just want you to know that the kids were never... I never would have... I know, she said. She said it and she meant it, and it made everything more complicated, not less, because knowing it didn't change the 18 months of fear or the bruise or the night she'd just put her children through. Intentions and actions were not the same currency, and she'd learned that the hard way, and she was going to hold on to that knowledge regardless of what turned out to be true about the rest of it. Noah spoke from the doorway. Is Dad under arrest? He asked. Both parents looked at him. He was 8 years old, and he'd spent the last several hours in a root cellar listening to muffled violence above his head, and he was asking the question with the same directness he'd brought to everything else tonight. No dramatics, just the question. Emily looked at Victor. Victor looked at his son. That's going to be up to other people, Victor said. Noah absorbed this. Are you hurt? Little bit. Noah looked at his father's wrist, at the angle of it. Your wrist looks wrong. Yeah. Does it hurt? A fair amount. Noah came into the room. He sat down on the edge of the bed, close to his father, but not immediately next to him, and he put his elbows on his knees the way he always did when he was thinking through something. Lily had transferred herself to the bed and was curled around Captain with her eyes closed, asleep with the instantaneous totality that only very young children managed. Emily watched her son look at his father. She didn't know what Noah was working through. She didn't know if she had the capacity right now to help him work through it. She was aware that this was a failure of some kind, and she was aware that it was a failure she was going to have to live with the same way she lived with all the other things she'd done imperfectly in the last 18 months, which was by putting it somewhere and coming back to it when she could do it properly. Cole came back. He stood in the doorway with both phones in his hands. His shoulder was visibly wrong, higher than it should be on the right side, held slightly forward, the subtle posture of someone managing pain. His face was still bleeding, slower now. He needed to sit down, Emily thought. He looked like a man who needed to sit down and probably wasn't going to. Extraction is confirmed, he said. 90 minutes. There's a clearing on the south slope. I'm going to need to mark it before they arrive. He looked at Emily. There's a flare kit in the armory. Red-orange casing, second shelf from the bottom. I'll get it? Also, he paused. A man named Hartwell is going to be on the helicopter. He's the task force coordinator for the reopened case. He's going to want to talk to both of you. His eyes moved to Victor. Extensively. Victor nodded. Cole looked at him for a moment. The look of two men in a room who share a frame of reference that the other people in the room don't have access to and aren't going to get access to tonight, or maybe ever. The operation you were running, Cole said. Double channel, 8 months. Yes. Alone? Essentially. Cole looked at the floor briefly, looked back up. That's a hard thing to maintain. Yes, Victor said. It is. Another pause. It wasn't sympathy exactly. It wasn't absolution. It was something more specific, the acknowledgement, from one person who understood the particular weight of operating in the dark without a net, to another. Cole turned back to the door. I'm going to go mark the LZ, he said. Don't move him. He left. Emily went to get the flare kit. The next 40 minutes moved in a different register from everything that had come before. Slower. Less urgent, but not relaxed. The kind of interim stillness that exists between a crisis and its resolution, when everything significant has already happened but the official conclusion hasn't arrived yet. Cole came back inside after marking the clearing. He stood at the kitchen counter and did something to his shoulder that made a sound Emily heard from the hallway and chose not to investigate. When she came back into the kitchen 2 minutes later, he was holding the counter with both hands and breathing through his nose, and his shoulder was sitting correctly again, and his face had gone a color that suggested the process of correcting it had been unpleasant. Sit down, she said. I'm fine. Cole. She set the first aid kit from the armory on the counter. Sit. Down. He sat. She cleaned the cut on his face without being asked to explain herself, and he let her do it without making the situation weird, which she appreciated. Shadow appeared from wherever he'd been, outside, she thought, or in the back hallway, and settled under the kitchen table with a heaviness that suggested even military German shepherds had their limits. She could see now that he had a gash on his left shoulder, shallow but real, and she made a note to find something in the kit for it when she was done with Cole. Your husband, Cole said while she was working on the cut. You believe him? I don't know yet, she said. That's honest. I'm very tired of dishonesty. She pressed a closure strip across the cut and smoothed it down. Did the people on the phone believe him? They already knew most of it. His contact within the task force had been flagging his information for the last 8 months. They were cautious about it. An inside source from that level is either an enormous asset or an elaborate trap, and you don't always know which until something like tonight happens. And tonight? Tonight clarifies some things. He was quiet for a moment. Not all of them, but some. She sat down across from him. The fire in the main room was burning lower. No one had added a log in hours. She should add one. She didn't move. What happens to him? She asked. Victor. Depends on Hartwell. Depends on what the task force decides his cooperation is worth. Depends on a lot of things I'm not positioned to predict. Cole looked at her. What do you want to happen? She thought about that honestly. I want my kids to be safe, she said. After that, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the right person to decide what happens to him. I'm too close to it. That's also honest. I'm having an honest night. Something moved at the corner of Cole's mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement of the absurdity of the last 6 hours, maybe. The specific dark humor that emerged in the aftermath of things that shouldn't be funny and somehow briefly were. Your investigator, she said. Reyes. You know him personally? We worked parallel cases for about 8 months. I know him well enough. Is he a good man? Cole considered. He's a committed man. I don't know if that's the same thing. He made a choice to run an operation outside official sanction because he believed the case mattered enough to justify it. That's either principled or reckless, depending on how it turns out. A pause. Seems like it's turning out. Emily leaned back in the chair. Above her, through the ceiling, through the snow piling on the roof, the storm was finally doing something different. She couldn't name what it was, some change in the pressure maybe, or the frequency of the gusts. Something. I've been afraid for 18 months, she said. Not to Cole specifically, just saying it out loud to the room, because it was true, and she was tired of carrying it without setting it down somewhere. Afraid every day, planning, not sleeping, watching the kids for signs that they were feeling it. Running through scenarios, routes out, who to call, whether to call. She exhaled. And now I'm sitting in a mountain cabin with a first aid kit and a dog. And apparently it might be over, and I don't know what to do with that yet. Cole said nothing. She looked at him. Does that make sense? Yeah, he said. It does. Does it ever go away? He thought about that longer than she expected him to. Mostly, he said. It mostly goes away. The rest of it you learn to carry differently. It wasn't a satisfying answer. She suspected he'd given it to her precisely because it wasn't. Because a satisfying answer would have been a lie, and Cole Mercer didn't seem to deal in those. She appreciated that more than she could currently say. The helicopter came in from the south at the 93-minute mark. They heard it before they saw it, a distant mechanical pulse cutting through the wind, which had dropped from its earlier ferocity to something merely miserable. Cole had gone outside to stand near the marked clearing and guide the pilot in with hand signals. Emily stood on the porch with her children, Lily on her hip, Noah pressed against her side. The aircraft came in low and fast, dropping into the clearing with the aggressive precision of a pilot who had done this in worse conditions than this, and knew exactly how much margin he had. It was a medium-lift helicopter, no military markings, the kind that didn't answer questions about who it belonged to. 3 men came out. 2 of them went immediately to handle the mercenaries Cole had secured outside. The third walked toward the cabin with the deliberate pace of someone who considered hurrying to be a personal failing. He was 60-ish, heavy through the chest, wearing a jacket over a dress shirt that was wildly inappropriate for the mountain conditions, as if he'd been called away from an office and hadn't had time to change. He stopped in front of Emily. Mrs. Carter. His voice was a bass baritone with a regional accent she couldn't immediately place. I'm Hartwell. We have a significant amount to discuss. I know, she said. He looked at her, at the children, at the general state of the porch, and the cabin visible through the open door. His expression processed all of it efficiently and resettled into the careful neutrality of a man who managed complex situations for a living. Are you injured? He asked. No. Children? No. He nodded. We'll get you warm and get you out of here. I have questions, but they can wait until you're in the aircraft. He glanced toward the tree line where his men were working. Where's the primary? Bedroom, Cole said, coming around the side of the cabin. He was holding his shoulder carefully, snow in his hair, the closure strips on his face catching the helicopter's exterior lights. Wrist secured. He's going to need his right wrist looked at. Hartwell looked at Cole, a different look from the one he'd given Emily. The look of 2 people who had a history that required no introduction. Mercer, he said. Hartwell. You look terrible. I've had a complicated evening. Hartwell made a sound that acknowledged this without commenting on it. He looked at the cabin again. We're going to need a full account, everything from first contact. I know. Tonight, ideally. I know. Hartwell looked at him for another moment. You made the right call. Activating the beacon, contacting the line. Didn't have a better option. You had other options. Hartwell's voice was careful. You chose this one. Cole said nothing. 4 years is a long time to be angry at an institution, Hartwell said. I wasn't angry, Cole said. I was done. And now? Cole looked at the helicopter, at the cleared landing zone he'd marked with flares, at Emily Carter standing on the porch of his cabin with her children, all 3 of them alive and warm and breathing, which 40 minutes ago had not been guaranteed. "I don't know yet," Cole said. Shadow appeared at his knee. Cole put his hand on the dog's head. Shadow leaned into it. Hartwell looked at them both for a moment, then turned back toward the helicopter. "Get your dog," he said. "You're both coming." Cole looked at the cabin, at the broken front window with snow blowing through it, at the firelight still burning in the main room, warm and irrelevant now, a light in an empty house. He looked at it for exactly 1 moment. Then he walked toward the helicopter. The helicopter lifted off the clearing at 4:47 in the morning. Cole felt it in his shoulder when the skids cleared the ground. That particular vibration that ran through the airframe and into everything touching it, and his shoulder reported back loudly and specifically about its feelings on the matter. He was sitting against the portside wall on a bench seat with Shadow between his knees, one hand on the dog's back, and he watched the clearing drop away through the window, and then the tree line, and then the whole ridge, the cabin becoming a small amber dot in the dark below. The fire still burning in the main room, visible even from this altitude as a faint orange pulse through the broken window. Then the clouds took it, gone. He faced forward. Hartwell was across from him, a tablet on his knee, already working. The 2 operators who'd come out of the helicopter first were in the forward section. Victor was in the rear, his wrists now in proper restraint cuffs rather than a zip tie. A task force medic working on his wrist, with the focused expression of someone doing a job rather than offering comfort. Emily was beside Cole, not touching him but close. Lily asleep across her lap, Noah against her shoulder with his eyes open and his face turned toward the window. The kid hadn't slept. Cole had noticed this on the ground, and he noticed it again now. Noah Carter was 8 years old, and he'd spent the night in a root cellar listening to things he would carry in some form for the rest of his life. And instead of sleeping when the immediate threat resolved, he was watching, processing, storing. Cole recognized it because he'd done the same thing himself at ages when he should have been doing something else. He looked away from the boy. Hartwell looked up from his tablet. "Talk me through the sequence. Start when they arrived." "Power went at approximately 23:40, Cole said. "First contact on north perimeter sensors shortly after. I made entry through the rear hatch at approximately—" "How many rear hatches does a mountain cabin have?" Hartwell asked. "1, if you build it right." Hartwell made a note. "Continue." Cole walked him through it. "Not quickly." Hartwell interrupted with questions every few minutes, the specific, technical questions of someone who understood the operational landscape and needed accurate data rather than a narrative. How many shots fired? Positions at time of contact? The exchange at the door before Victor entered the cabin. Cole gave him what he had, honestly, including the parts where he'd moved slower than he should have, and the part where Victor's pistol had connected with his face and taken his vision sideways for a half-second. Hartwell wrote everything down. When Cole finished, Hartwell set the tablet on his knee and looked at him. "The rear hatch," he said. "Yes." "You built that." "I built that." "You also built the sensor array." "Yes." "The armory." "Yes." Hartwell looked at him the way a man looked at someone he'd known in a previous context and was now reassessing in a current one. "When you left the task force, we characterized your departure as stress-related in the official record." Cole said nothing. "That characterization was incorrect," Hartwell said. "That characterization was convenient," Cole said. "Yes." Hartwell didn't blink. "It was also incorrect. The case you identified before you left, the weapons network, the logistics bridge, you were right. Your assessment was accurate. The decision to walk it back had nothing to do with the quality of your work. I know that. It had to do with the level of exposure it would have created for certain ongoing operations in 2 other regions. Pulling the thread you'd found would have unraveled things that the people above my pay grade weren't prepared to sacrifice yet." Hartwell paused. "You weren't wrong. You were inconvenient." Cole looked at him. "There a difference?" "In the moment? No." Hartwell set the tablet on the seat beside him. "In retrospect, I'd argue yes. You were inconvenient because you were right. That's a different category from being wrong. You drove me out of an operation I'd spent 3 years building. The people above me made a decision. I implemented it." Hartwell's voice was level. "I'm not telling you that was right. I'm telling you what it was." Cole sat with that. Outside, the clouds were beginning to show something at their eastern edges. Not light exactly, but a change in the darkness. The very first suggestion of morning happening somewhere below the horizon. "The case," Cole said. "Where is it now?" "Active. Fully authorized, fully resourced, 17 months in." Hartwell picked up the tablet again. "The material Mrs. Carter provided gave us the documentation layer we were missing. Names, transactions, movement records, combined with Victor's intelligence from the inside." He paused. "We've been building something comprehensive." "How comprehensive?" "Enough to dismantle the operational structure at 3 levels. Suppliers, logistics, buyers." Hartwell looked at him steadily. "Enough to do what you identified 4 years ago and do it completely this time." Cole was quiet. Shadow shifted under his hand, repositioning, and Cole adjusted his grip. The dog was warm and real and heavy against his legs, and the weight of him was one of those things that was difficult to articulate the value of, but was, in practice, considerable. "You came up here to find me specifically," Cole said. "Tonight. You could have sent anyone." Hartwell looked at the window. "We had a flag on your emergency beacon frequency. When it activated, it came to me directly." He paused. "And yes, I came personally." "Because of the case?" "Partly." Cole waited. "Because I owed you a conversation I was too much of a coward to have 4 years ago," Hartwell said. He said it simply, without drama, in the voice of a man making a factual statement rather than an apology, which made it, Cole thought, more genuine than most apologies. He didn't say anything for a while. The helicopter banked slightly south. Below, through a break in the cloud layer, Cole could see the mountain ridge, white and vast and indifferent, the way the mountains always were, the way he'd come to appreciate rather than resent after 4 years of living inside that indifference. "What happens to him?" Cole said, nodding toward the rear of the aircraft. Hartwell followed his gaze. Victor was sitting still, the medic done with his wrist now. He'd been looking at the back of Emily's head since they boarded, a look that Emily was either unaware of or had decided not to acknowledge. Probably the latter. Victor Kane cooperated with an active federal investigation for 8 months at significant personal risk, while maintaining his cover inside a criminal network, Hartwell said. That cooperation contributed materially to the case we're now prosecuting. He let that sit. That doesn't erase everything, but it shapes the conversation considerably. He hurt her, Cole said. Yes. Hartwell didn't deflect it. He did. That's a separate matter, one that's between them and the relevant process, not something I get to resolve from a helicopter. He paused. You understand the distinction. Cole understood the distinction. He didn't particularly like it, but he understood it, which was a condition he'd learned to live inside of a long time ago. Emily shifted beside him. She was awake, had been awake the whole time, he thought, listening to the conversation with her eyes on her daughter's sleeping face. She didn't look up. He can hear everything you're saying about him. I know, Hartwell said. Does that matter to you? Hartwell considered the question with more seriousness than Emily had probably expected. It means what I say has to be accurate, so yes, it matters. Emily looked up at him, then at Cole, then back at the window. Lily stirred on her lap, turned her head, opened her eyes with the slow, complete confusion of a child waking in a strange place and not immediately knowing which reality they were in. She looked at the ceiling, looked at the vibrating walls, looked at Cole. Are we in a helicopter? She asked. Yes, Cole said. She looked at Shadow. Shadow looked back at her with his ancient, battle-worn, completely serene face. Can I pet him? She asked. Yeah, go ahead. She reached across Emily's lap and put her small hand on the top of Shadow's head. Shadow's tail moved once, just once, a single slow sweep. Lily smiled with the complete and uncomplicated joy of a 5-year-old who has decided that this was a satisfactory development, and then she put her head back on her mother's lap and went back to sleep. Cole looked at the dog. Shadow looked back at him with the particular expression that Cole had, over 4 years, come to read fairly well. The expression that meant, I've done my part, and I'd like to note that my shoulder also hurts, and I'm choosing to be dignified about it. Cole scratched behind his ear, son. They landed at a facility outside of a mid-sized city Cole didn't need to name to know exactly where he was. The kind of facility that didn't appear on commercial maps, but that had an excellent medical bay, a debrief suite, a kitchen that made surprisingly decent coffee, and the general atmosphere of a place where significant things were decided quietly. The next 6 hours were not cinematic. They were paperwork. They were a doctor who reset Cole's shoulder with a matter-of-fact competence that he appreciated and a local anesthetic that he appreciated more. They were a debrief room with 4 chairs and a recording device, and Hartwell asking the same questions from the helicopter with greater specificity and follow-up. They were another room where Emily sat for 2 hours with 2 different people who weren't Hartwell and who asked her questions Cole wasn't in the room for. At one point, Cole was in the kitchen getting coffee, and Noah appeared in the doorway. "There's a room with a TV," Noah said. "Lily's watching something." "Good." "I don't want to watch TV." Cole looked at him. "Okay." Noah came into the kitchen and sat on the counter. Not the chair, the counter, the way kids climbed surfaces when they were thinking about something rather than settling into something. He was wearing a jacket someone had found for him, too large, the sleeves rolled up. "The man who came for us," Noah said. "My dad's boss, basically. The one running the whole thing." He looked at his hands. "Is he going to jail?" "Some of them are already in custody," Cole said. "The rest will be." "How do you know?" "Because Hartwell knows how to finish things." He paused. "And because your mom gave them what they needed to do it. She's the reason this is ending." Noah processed this. She didn't know that. When she ran, she didn't know if it was going to work. No. She just did it anyway. Yeah. Noah was quiet for a moment. He picked at the edge of the jacket sleeve. "My dad. Is he—" He stopped. Recalibrated. He was trying to fix it, right? That's what it sounds like. Cole thought about how to answer that honestly, without handing a kid more complexity than he could carry right now. He was trying to, Cole said. Whether he went about it right, that's more complicated. Both things can be true. Noah looked at him. That's kind of an unsatisfying answer. Yeah. Cole drank his coffee. Sorry. It's okay. Noah swung his feet against the cabinet face. My mom says you used to do what my dad does, before you went to the mountain. Something like it. Why did you stop? Cole looked at the coffee in his hand, at the steam rising off it. I got to a point where I wasn't sure who I was doing it for anymore, he said. And once you're not sure about that, it's hard to keep doing it the right way. And now? He thought about the root cellar hatch, about Noah's hand in his. Now I'm less unsure, Cole said. Noah considered this the way he considered everything, seriously, without pretending it was simpler than it was. Then he nodded once, the decisive nod of a kid who has reached a conclusion he's going to live with. He slid off the counter. Shadow's in the other room. He found a blanket. Sounds about right. Noah went back to the hallway. Stopped. Turned. Thank you, he said. For, the whole thing. Cole looked at him. Yeah, he said. Go watch TV. Noah almost smiled. Then he was gone. Emily found Cole 3 hours later. He was in a small outdoor area behind the facility, a concrete courtyard, not charming, with a single metal bench and a view of a chain-link fence, and beyond it, a field that was still dark at this hour. He had Shadow beside him and a second cup of coffee that had gone cold. She sat on the bench. She was wearing different clothes. Someone had found her a change, practical items, nothing that fit quite right. Her hair was down. She looked like a person who had been awake for too long and had stopped being able to feel exactly how tired she was, which Cole recognized as the stage past exhaustion where things got eerily calm. Hartwell offered me a formal deposition arrangement, she said. A protected witness protocol while the prosecutions proceed. 6 to 18 months, possibly longer. That's standard, he said. He also offered me a job. She said it with a slight bewilderment, like someone reporting a piece of news they hadn't fully integrated. Cybersecurity consultant for the task force. Apparently building that file storage system for Victor was, he said it was the most elegant encryption architecture they'd seen in a private network. Cole said nothing. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, she said. Both, probably. She almost laughed. Almost. They sat with the quiet for a moment. Somewhere beyond the fence, a bird was making a noise. The first bird sound Cole had heard in hours. The specific sound of an animal declaring that morning was arriving regardless of what had happened in the dark before it. Victor is going to cooperate fully, Emily said. Hartwell told me. Full testimony. All of it. He's been building a comprehensive account for months. Names, dates, operational details. The task force didn't have. She paused. In exchange for a reduced... She stopped. I don't know the legal terminology. Something reduced. Sentencing considerations, Cole said. Yes. She was quiet. I don't know how to feel about that. You don't have to know right now. Hartwell said the same thing. She turned and looked at him. You two have a similar way of talking. We trained in similar environments. She looked at her hands. He hurt me. Victor, I need you to know that I'm not... Whatever he says about his intentions, whatever the operational rationale was, he hurt me, and he made my children live in that fear. And I'm not... She pressed her lips together. I'm not going to let the larger picture erase that. Good, Cole said. She looked at him. That's exactly right, he said. Don't let it. She exhaled. Long, slow exhale that seemed to take something with it. Not everything, but something. The first installment of a debt the body pays when the danger finally, actually, stops. What are you going to do? She asked. He thought about the cabin, about the broken window and the fire that was probably out by now, the room cold and snow-covered and damaged. He'd need to replace the front door, the window frame, the bedroom door frame, probably repaint a wall that he didn't want to repaint. Go back, he said. She looked at him. To the mountain. It's my home. She didn't argue with that. She understood something about the concept of home that a lot of people didn't, that it wasn't necessarily the place that was easiest or most comfortable, but the place where you'd made the most honest version of yourself. And that honesty had weight. Hartwell wants you back, she said. He didn't say it directly, but he said a lot of things sideways. I noticed. Are you going to? Cole looked at the fence, at the field beyond it, lightening almost imperceptibly at the horizon. I don't know yet. I've been saying that a lot tonight. It seems honest. It's what I've got. She looked at him for a moment, at the closure strips on his face, the careful way he was holding his shoulder, at the dog leaning against his leg. You saved my kids, she said. You kept them quiet in a root cellar for 40 minutes with a 5-year-old, Cole said. I'd argue you did most of the work. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry, something in the middle. The sound of someone who has been holding too many things and has finally found a moment where some of them could just fall. Cole sat next to her and let her have it. He didn't say anything. He didn't put his arm around her, or tell her it was going to be fine, or perform any of the gestures that were supposed to signify comfort. He just sat there, present and quiet, the way a person could be present when they'd stopped needing to fill silence with something. Shadow put his head on her knee. She put her hand on his head and stayed like that for a while. And eventually the sound stopped, and she straightened up, and she looked at the horizon where the light was beginning to be undeniable. The sun came up fully at 7:23. Cole watched it from the courtyard while the facility around him began its morning rhythm. Doors, footsteps, the smell of actual breakfast from somewhere inside. Shadow had fallen asleep against his leg with the deep, boneless sleep of an animal that had decided the crisis was resolved and all remaining decisions were someone else's problem. Hartwell came out at 7:40. He stood beside the bench. He didn't sit. The first warrants executed this morning, he said. 3 arrests in the target network. 2 more expected by end of day. The documentation chain holds. Cole nodded. I mean it about the position, Hartwell said. There's a role. Advisory capacity, field consultation. You'd have significant autonomy over how you structured your involvement. He paused. No desk. I know better than to offer you a desk. Cole was quiet. You don't have to decide today, Hartwell said. I know. Or this month. Hartwell. Cole looked up at him. I said I know. Hartwell accepted this. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, still wearing the dress shirt, still operating on whatever energy source allowed certain people to function across multiple time zones and crisis conditions without apparent degradation. The dog can come. I'll make it a formal condition if I have to. Cole looked at Shadow, asleep on the concrete. I'll think about it, Cole said. It was not a yes. It was not the decisive, clean resolution that certain kinds of stories offered at this moment. It was a man sitting on a metal bench with an old dog at dawn, holding a question he hadn't fully answered yet and being honest about that instead of pretending he had. Hartwell nodded once. He went back inside. Cole sat. He thought about the cabin on the ridge, about the cabin as he'd first found it, derelict, roof damaged, one wall partially collapsed, smelling of mold and abandonment, and the particular loneliness of a structure that had been useful once and then wasn't. He'd spent that first summer rebuilding it alone, 200 miles from anyone who knew his name, learning which muscles a hammer used that 15 years of combat hadn't used, which was not many, but the few that it was had surprised him. He'd built the rear hatch on a Tuesday in August because he couldn't sleep, and he needed something to do with his hands. He'd built the cellar because the winter had been brutal, and he needed a place to store provisions. He'd built the sensor array because one night he'd heard something in the tree line that turned out to be a deer, and his hand had gone to where a weapon would have been. And he'd understood in that moment that the issue wasn't the thing in the tree line. He'd built all of it piece by piece without admitting to himself what it added up to. A man making a place that was simultaneously a refuge and a fortification, still ready for something he kept insisting he was done with. Emily had asked him, "You planned for this?" He'd said, "I planned for something." The honest version was simpler than that. The honest version was that he'd never stopped. Not entirely. He'd changed the address, changed the context, gone quiet in ways that looked like withdrawal, and maybe were, partly. But something in him had kept building, kept preparing, kept sharpening, because the part of him that was good at this specific thing didn't know how to be nothing. The question was what to do with that. He looked at the horizon, at the sunrise, which was not particularly spectacular, not the cinematic kind, just the ordinary kind, gray and then pale gold, and then a washed-out blue that suggested the storm system was moving off east. Functional. Honest. He thought about Noah's hand in his, coming up out of the dark. He thought about Lily asking if she could pet the dog. He thought about Emily in the kitchen in the first hour, sitting across from him at the table, telling him the truth with her children nearby, and her wrist bruised and her whole life in some kind of free fall, and doing it steadily. Making decisions under pressure that most people couldn't have made with unlimited time. He thought about the job he'd been offered. He thought about the mountain. He thought about whether those two things were actually as opposed as he'd been telling himself they were. Shadow woke up, lifted his head, looked at Cole with the dark, steady eyes of an animal that had asked for nothing in 15 years except food and work and proximity, and had been, by Cole's best accounting, owed considerably more than it had received. "Yeah," Cole said. "I know." Shadow put his head back down. Cole finished the cold coffee, set the cup on the ground, sat for another few minutes in the morning that was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. Then he stood up. He went back inside. He found Emily and the kids in the kitchen. Lily was eating scrambled eggs with the single-minded intensity of a person for whom the immediate world had reduced to one important thing. Noah was on his second glass of orange juice and looking more like a kid than he had at any point in the last 10 hours. Emily was drinking coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug and her eyes tracking her children with the particular quality of attention that was less surveillance and more inventory, counting them, repeatedly, in the way parents sometimes did after something had tried to take them. Cole sat down. Someone put a plate in front of him. He ate. For a while nobody said anything, which was fine. There was a version of silence that was empty and a version that was full, and this one was the second kind, full of the previous night and the morning light and eggs getting eaten and coffee getting drunk and children being alive at a table. Lily looked up from her plate. "Are you going to come with us?" she asked Cole. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Mama said we're getting a new house," Lily said. "A safe one." Emily looked at Cole over the rim of her coffee mug. "I may have described the witness protection arrangement in simplified terms." "It sounds good," Cole said. "Are you coming?" Lily asked again. "Shadow and I live on a mountain," Cole said. Lily considered this. "You could visit." Cole looked at her. At this 5-year-old who had spent a night in a root cellar with a stuffed rabbit and had come out the other side asking a stranger if he was going to visit. "Yeah," he said, "I could visit." Lily went back to her eggs, satisfied. Noah was looking at Cole with an expression that was older than visiting and knew it, and Cole met his eyes briefly and nodded once, and Noah nodded back, and that was sufficient. Emily set her mug down. She looked at Cole. "Thank you," she said. Not the way she'd said it before, not the compressed, urgent gratitude of someone in the middle of a crisis. The other kind, the kind that came after, when you'd had enough time to start understanding the shape of what you'd been given. Cole looked at her. "You're welcome," he said. Simple, honest, the only thing that needed to be said. He left the facility at 11 in the morning with Shadow in the passenger seat of a vehicle Hartwell arranged, and a phone number written on a piece of paper in Hartwell's particular cramped handwriting. He didn't call it that day. He drove north and west, back toward the mountains, through roads that were wet and clearing as the storm system finished its exit. The sky was the particular blue that followed major weather. Washed clean, almost excessive in its clarity, the kind of sky that made the world look like it had been recently corrected. He thought about a lot of things on the drive. He didn't solve any of them, which was fine. Some things didn't want to be solved on a single drive. Some things wanted to be carried for a while, turned over, examined from different angles and different lights before they settled into the form they were going to take. He drove. Shadow watched the passing trees with the alert, satisfied expression of a dog who had been in worse vehicles under worse conditions and was choosing to regard the present circumstances as acceptable. They got back to the ridge in the late afternoon. The cabin looked the same from the outside, which was both accurate and misleading. Cole sat in the truck for a moment and looked at it. The broken front window had drifted full of snow. The chimney was cold. The porch boards had a dark stain on them that he was going to have to sand. He got out. He went inside and built a fire. He found the repair materials he'd need for the window in the shed out back. He made coffee. He looked at the broken door frame and the damaged hallway wall and the general evidence of a night that had happened here and left its marks. He picked up the piece of paper with Hartwell's number on it. He set it on the kitchen table where he could see it. He sat down. Shadow sat across from him, in the same spot near the fireplace where he'd been when Emily knocked on the door, and looked at Cole with those dark, patient eyes. The fire caught. The cabin filled slowly with warmth. Outside, the Granite Ridge Mountains stood exactly as they always had, massive and old and indifferent to human events, wearing the new snow like it was nothing, like storms came and went and the mountain simply waited. Which it did. Which was, Cole thought, either the most comforting thing in the world or the most sobering, depending on the day. Today it was both. He looked at the paper, at the fire, at his dog. He thought about the world out there, still turning, still requiring the things it required, still full of people in root cellars who needed someone to build them a hatch from the inside. Cole Mercer picked up the phone. The most dangerous people aren't always the ones making noise. Sometimes they're the